Hello and welcome to Season 12, Episode 22 of the Ubuntu podcast. In this show, we're going to be chatting with Sarah Townson about Science Oxford and robots. We'll also have some command line love, and we'll go over your feedback. And joining me this week are the motley crew back together again, Popey.
Hello.
And Wimpy.
Hello, that's an illustrious introduction.
It is. I've never been introduced as Popey on this show. I don't think.
Yeah, you have. I'm sure you have.
Someone needs to go back and listen to the last 12 seasons and find out if anyone ever introduced me as Popey.
Somebody will know.
Yes, and do let us know. You can email popey@popey.com. Martin, you've not been around for a while. What have you been doing?
I have been making Ubuntu Mate 1904 for the GPD WIN 2.
What is the GPD WIN 2?
If I may, I think the GPD WIN 2 is in your wheelhouse, Mark.
Uh-oh.
It's one of these ultra-mobile PC form factor devices from GPD.
Okay.
But this one is specifically developed for gaming. So it has the sort of BlackBerry style keyboard, QWERTY keyboard. But then above that, it has an Xbox 360 controller integrated into it.
So this shows up to the OS as an Xbox 360 controller.
And also, cunningly, it has a switch to toggle its behavior between one of the analog sticks operating as the mouse pointer, or you can flip it over into controller mode, and therefore, all of the keys bind to what you'd expect. And around the back, so if you imagine a small laptop, if you imagine at the back of that where the hinge of the screen meets the back of the laptop, round the back there you've got the triggers, that both the triggers are there, and then you've got the analog sticks, and then you've got the regular D-pad and the 4 buttons. And then it's also got a micro SD card as well as an SSD. And the idea is that you put all of your retro gaming titles, if you like, on the what they called?
SD card.
That on the SD card, that's it. Too many SDs there. So it's pretty cool actually. I've been using it to play some 1980s and 1990s coin-op games, and it's absolutely splendid for that.
But it's not going to play your latest 3D ultra-realistic driving simulators, I imagine.
Well, I haven't tried yet, but I have seen videos of people playing like Tomb Raider and stuff like that on it.
Yeah?
And, I mean, unsurprisingly, CSGO works quite well in the hundreds of frames per second. So it can play popular titles. I'm not quite sure what the cutoff is, where you have to, really draw back the performance, or not the performance, but the resolution of the graphics it's producing. But there are people playing sophisticated games with it for sure.
Right, well, let's get on with the rest of the show. And we're delighted to welcome to the show this week Sarah Townson. Hello, Sarah.
Hi.
Now, Sarah, I know you from Science Oxford. What do you do there exactly?
Well, you specifically know me from the Creative Computing Club, which is an Saturday club I run once a month for 9 to 12-year-olds. I also do workshops in schools, mostly programming workshops. I do the occasional adult course, teacher CPD. I run family workshops, a sort of real range of different things, but my focus is on introducing people to programming, so introducing beginners and trying to make it exciting and accessible and not as scary as it was when I first learned how to code.
Is that the only mission of Science Oxford, like introducing programming?
No, that's my specific part, but we're a STEM charity. So we, the title says that we focus on science, but we do science, technology, engineering and maths, and everything kind of around that. And we sort of run a lot of weird is probably the wrong word, interesting events where we try and bring science and technology into things you wouldn't normally expect it. So I think we've done a science of food workshop. There's a CSI event running that's got some forensic stuff. Loads of really interesting stuff going on all over Oxfordshire and Buckinghamshire.
So what kind of, you said you met through the Creative Computing Club, which teaches programming to kids. What sort of age range are the kids, and where do you get them started, or have they already this 2019? Have they already know Scratch and stuff like that?
The kids who come to my clubs start about 9. I sometimes get some 8-year-olds. Parents sometimes try to sneak in 7-year-olds, but it's not too bad. Up to 12. They haven't always done any programming before, but they quite often have. So it can be a bit challenging to sort of set the level. So we try and encourage people to come to the earliest workshop in the day if they're beginners, and to come a bit later if they have done lots before. But I don't like running Scratch workshops because they often have done it at primary school, or they'll have such different ranges of abilities. And Scratch, which is a drag and drop style programming language, it's really easy to get started with. So some kids will just go completely wild with it immediately. Others will need a lot more help. So it's quite hard to keep a theme going and to keep a workshop going with Scratch. So I tend to do Python workshops, usually MicroPython with a BBC microbit, partly because the kids find it harder, so it's easier to keep them all at the same level, but also because it's something they're unlikely to have done at school or won't have done much of. So it's just to give them something different, so they're not just having another lesson, they're coming to do something interactive and interesting and fun.
But what a time to be alive that you can say they already know Scratch. Like from school, like I remember us talking about this kind of thing 5-6 years ago, and we were lamenting the fact that in schools they don't get any kind of coding, of any kind. And now you're telling me, oh well, they already know that stuff, so I have to teach them something new. That's brilliant, surely.
Yeah, it is amazing. I didn't learn till university, and so I still call myself a beginner. I know a lot more than I did when I started teaching it, but there's still loads to learn. And I feel like because I'm learning it as well, it's a little bit easier to get some of the more complicated points across than...
Do you have to do teacher training in order to do these classes?
I don't, because I don't work in a school. So, yeah, it's a complicated one. Because I wouldn't call myself a teacher, and sort of the aim of my sessions is not necessarily to have the kids leaving the session being amazing Python programmers. It's just to get them trying something new, and even if they don't understand everything they've done, they'll understand some of it. And if they come back month on month, they understand a lot more by the time they leave. And it's just getting them to see that it's not so hard. You can do really interesting things with it with just a bit of practice and a bit of imagination. So I'm not trying to sort of, specifically teach them anything in particular, if that makes sense.
And can the kids dip in and out of this? Is there like a syllabus? So do they go along for, a school term and they can stitch those together, or is it all free form each time?
It's free form each time. Every month is a completely different topic. So because I usually use the microbit and MicroPython, if the same families come, I've had a couple of families who've been coming for at least a year and a half now. So they're a lot more advanced than they were when they started. But because, again, I do the same sort of programming every month, it's not necessarily teaching them a new function or something. It's so... My last club was about puzzle boxes and escape rooms, so it was really about and/or statements. But they had this little box, and they were coming up with a riddle and trying to make this box give the correct answer based on their code, so they could challenge each other. Or we'll get them programming robots to zoom around the room. So even if the programming each week is very similar, it's got a new spin and it's something interesting, and it's sort of. Yeah.
Is there quite a leap from like the Scratch, which, as you said, is like drag and drop, and I mean, it is programming because there are all the typical parts of a programming language in there. Just it's visually represented differently. Is there quite a jump for the kids to go from that to actually typing words in a text editor?
Yeah, definitely. I think part of it is because they're not used to using computers anymore. A lot of schools only have tablets, and at home they quite often have tablets, so they're not used to using a keyboard and mouse. So especially some of the younger ones, they often really struggle with the typing. I mean, it's not universal. Some of them will come in and they'll already know everything I'm trying to do with them, but others, it just takes them quite a long time to type in a sentence. But the logic behind it, I do try and relate it back to Scratch wherever possible. I can't always because sometimes it just confuses things more than you'd like, but where possible I try and relate it to something that I've done before. So I'm trying to help them not get as frustrated by the errors they get when they put a capital letter in the wrong place, and just sort of get them thinking about the logic of it instead, and saying it doesn't matter, this happens all the time, just stay calm and read through it.
And you mentioned MicroPython and the microbit. Is that starkly different from Python as the rest of us would know it, or is it just Python that runs on a small computer?
That is a very good question. I probably can't answer because I'm not very good at programming in regular Python. I learned regular Python when I was first learning to code, but ever since I've pretty much only done MicroPython. So at the sort of level that I'm working at, it's very, very similar, but I'm sure there are probably vast differences that I wouldn't be able to tell you about. But it runs on the microbit, and yeah, so it's definitely quite stripped down, and there's memory limitations. So you've got to have quite small programs. You run out of space fairly quickly if you're trying to do anything complicated.
Yeah, and I think there's limitations to the modules that are available for it as well. You don't have the whole sort of library of modules that you can just download and bung on there.
Yeah, I've struggled with the time module before, trying to find something to do what I want and having to jump through lots of hoops to get something actually timing things the way I want them to.
Yeah, time on the microbit is a bit of an interesting concept.
It has no concept of time, does it?
It has a counter of some sort.
It's a kind of arbitrary.
For those who've not seen a microbit, it's like a super tiny, like the size of a matchbox with a 5x5 grid of LEDs on it and an edge connector along the bottom. What can you do with that?
Oh, you can do loads. I like to compare it to an Arduino, but a lot easier to use. And it's got loads of extra stuff already built in. So it's got, as well as the screen on the front, it's got 2 buttons. So it's got 2 inputs automatically. It's got an accelerometer. So you can turn it upside down and shake it. That's the best one. It has a lot of built-in functions, modules, I don't know how you refer to them, in the Python module so you can just say, if it's upside down, make it do something, or if it's in free fall, make it do something. So that's quite hard to stop the kids from using sometimes. So it's really, really a lot of thought went into designing the microbit module for MicroPython to make it really easy to quickly get things happening. It's got a compass. It's got a temperature sensor on the chip. Neither the compass or the temperature sensor I found are particularly reliable, but they're quite nice for giving them something to have a play around with. And then the edge connector means you can pretty much connect whatever you like to it. So you can put a speaker on it and make it talk to you. You can plug it into some motors and make it drive around. It has a built-in radio chip. So the microbits can send messages between each other. So you can either use them as controllers for the robots, or you can get the kids sending secret messages across the room and having to decode them. And
it's quite a rich palette of functionality.
Yeah, definitely.
So you mentioned robots. Tell us about the robots. Are these controlled by the microbit, or is there something else involved? Are they kits? How does that work?
So the ones I use with the kids, I've got 2 different kinds of them now. So the first ones I made, I bought just a really cheap robot car kit from eBay, and then put a motor driver on it and a microbit, and then I had someone help me figure out what to do, because this was the first thing I ever tried, and I could only make it drive backwards on one wheel and then nothing, wouldn't do anything else. It was terrible. So once I got the hang of it, so I've got a whole fleet of those now, because they are just working with the microbit at their base level. You can just write an algorithm on the microbit, press go, and it will follow whatever path you've given it. You can control it with a different microbit to make a little radio controller. You can add sensors onto the front. So I've done line following versions. I've added little bumper switches on the front. I did a moon buggy one recently. So I put little grabbing mechanisms on the front, and they had to drive them around and pick up moon rocks that were just sort of rock-coloured pom-poms.
We did one once where we tied balloons to them and then a spike and got them to drive them at each other. That was good fun.
So these are the little Perspex ones you can buy on eBay. They've got yellow motors.
Yeah, exactly. So they can't drive over very difficult obstacles. As soon as you try and get them driving up a tiny, tiny slope, they get stuck. But the wheels are big enough that they can sort of move around. So those are the main ones I use. And well, recently I ran a summer camp where the kids soldered up their own robots. So I just had a little PCB with some smaller called N20 motors. So everything's just a lot smaller and hopefully a lot more compact, but they have a lot less torque, so are even worse at driving over small ramps. But I'm hoping eventually to replace the first set with the second set so I can store them a bit easier and get them out to schools without having to take the whole van.
What kind of feedback do you get from the kids and also from their parents?
I get pretty good feedback generally. The kids usually just sort of forget that they're supposed to be learning anything and just say, yay, it was great because of robots. And so, yeah, that's really nice, but not very helpful. And yeah, the parents are always give pretty good feedback. But again, it's quite hard because they're can't really force them to sit down and tell us any useful information. So it's always very hastily scribbled comments. So it's either just the kettle didn't boil or, try this topic next time. I'm really interested in this. But I have quite a few parents who sort of work in tech, and sometimes I've had one come up and say, oh, it'd be really interesting to do a cybersecurity workshop. And I said, well, I don't know a great deal about that. I can look into it. And he was like, oh, well, I can help you do that. So parents do like to get involved as well, which is really good.
Yeah, I've noticed quite a few of them learning a lot of programming as well. The ones who don't have a tech background do sometimes get stuck in themselves, even when the kids aren't as interested. Yeah.
Yeah, try and pitch it as a family workshop, so it's not just you bring your child and then you go and have a cup of tea, which some people do and some kids prefer that, but most of the time it's both useful to us because the parents can help with the debugging, which is usually just they've put a space in the wrong place or spelt receive wrong, and parents are quite good at finding those things, but other times, they come and they say, oh, I don't know anything about this. I'm not going to be any help. But by the end of the session, you can see them kind of leaning over and making suggestions. So that's really nice to see.
So another thing that you do when you're not in Science Oxford is you build, or sometimes when you are in Science Oxford, is that you build fighting robots.
Yes.
Oh, really?
Tell us a bit about that. Is this just like on TV when you watch Robot Wars?
It can be, but it's not when I do it because it's very expensive to build the kind that are on TV. They cost like tens of thousands of pounds to build those. Very expensive, very big. So I build ridiculously small ones. So the ones on TV are something like over 100 kilo. Mine are 150 grams.
Wow.
And they're really cute. They're really small. So I, sort of 3D print them and take them to different places around the country to battle them. And I sort of, I've got a very bad win to loss ratio. But that's, again, not really why I'm doing it. I didn't know how to design anything on a computer when I started. So I sort of started doing it as a way to learn how to use CAD programs. And
is this a thing like Robot Wars, but for tiny little 3D printed things that lots of people do and get them together?
Yeah, it is. It's they're called ant weights. So there's a range of different weight classes. So the ones on TV are called heavyweights. Ant weights are not the smallest you can do. I think I can't remember what they call the smaller ones, flea weights and nano weights maybe. They do 75 grams and 25 gram ones, but barely anyone bothers making those because they're really, really tough. It's hard enough getting everything fitting inside something that's 150 grams because it also has to fit in a 4-inch cube. So as well as the weight limit, you've got to sort of squish everything in really small.
Wow.
This sounds fantastic.
Yeah, it does. I can't imagine.
You've got a 3D printer.
Yeah, I can't imagine how you get like the power, the motor, the control, the wheels, all of that.
The wheels are the hardest thing for me. When I bought wheels and then I had to design the entire robot around the wheels and they were always slightly too big or slightly too small. So I started 3D printing my own and then molding some silicone tires, and they're not very grippy, so they're definitely not as good as the ones I bought, but at least I can put dye in the silicone, so now I have multicolored wheels, and also they're the exact size I want to within a millimeter. So
Wow.
I mean, you said how light they are. I mean, what in terms of the processing, what provides that?
mostly there is no coding involved at all. You buy a little speed controller and you plug in some motors and a receiver and buy like a radio control car kind of setup, and then you just plug everything in and you're good to go. So that's what most people do. So I have 4 robots now, so 2 of them are done that way, and my other 2 are both microbit based. I don't think they've ever won a battle, but I have a lot of fun. And there's somebody else who goes to the competitions regularly who's made one with a Raspberry Pi in it, a
cool.
Pi Zero, and I want to say he's been moderately successful, but also it's really hard to figure out what's going on often at these competitions because it's all very fast paced and everyone's trying to get their robots in the arena and they're trying to quite a quick turnover. So I might be lying. He might not do that well, but it looks really cool anyway.
And where does this all take place?
All sorts of places, mostly around the kind of Midlands and the south, but I think the next one's going to be in Sheffield. The last one I went to was in some village whose name I can't remember that was about an hour away from Oxford. And I've done one in Bristol. Yeah, they sort of take place wherever anyone will host them, really, because it's all done by volunteers. So as soon as someone's willing to host one and find a venue, I think the maximum robots they will take in a competition before it breaks the system to organise the fights is 128 or 125. Right. And we reached that at the last one, and they had to make people take robots out. So I was a bit sad. So it's getting bigger and bigger, which is, I find, quite surprising now that Robot Wars has been cancelled again. Suddenly even more people are getting into it. But
it's amazing.
What is this small robot fighting organisation called?
That is also a very good question. I'm not sure. All of the organisation is either done on a forum called Robot Wars 101, which seems to have been around for a very long time, or I think a lot of it's done on Facebook, so which I don't use, so I don't know how active people are on there, but the forum seems to be the place to go, and it's all sort of done behind the scenes. Occasionally there's a post that says let's vote on the rules, so clearly some people are doing things behind the background, but I don't know what the thing is.
I did do a quick search when you were talking about Antweight, and I did stumble upon the robotwars101.org site, and it has a page for the Antweight World Series Rules version 4.2 with the sizes and weights and...
Yeah, I think that was a jokingly named name of the competition. It's the 20th year they've been running now. I think it has maybe 2 or 3 times been hosted not in the UK, so they say that it's real now. But it was, I think, the first one was just held with sort of just a few people in a university or something, so they thought it would be an amusing title.
This is fantastic. I'd never heard of this, so this is it for the rest of the evening now.
It's so much fun. You should get involved. Say that to everyone, but it does take over your life a little bit.
Well, thanks very much for coming on the show, Sarah. If people want to find out more about the Creative Computing Club and Science Oxford, where can they go to find out more?
There'll be our website, scienceoxford.com, and will be an events page on there somewhere.
Because the clubs aren't running at the moment, are they? They're starting...
No, they stopped for the summer, but I think the next couple have just been put up online.
Oh, cool.
So the next one's in a couple of weeks, I think.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thanks very much for coming on.
Thanks, Sarah.
If you love the command line as much as we do, send us a command that will blow our minds, and we might even mention it on the show. Send your command line love to show@ubuntupodcast.org.
And now it's time for Command Line Love.
I've missed that. No, wait. No, I haven't.
So, Martin, you've got some love for us this week. What is your love?
I do have some love this week. While I was away, probably gallivanting, you talked about the release of 1804.3 on the podcast. And I was thinking to myself, I'm not sure people know that you have to enable the hardware enablement stack when it becomes available.
I certainly didn't.
So my command line love, which will be in the show notes, is how you enable the new hardware enablement stack on 1804 desktop and 1804 server. I won't rattle off the whole command now, but you basically install a couple of meta packages, and those meta packages know what constitutes the current state of that hardware enablement, and it brings in a new kernel, an X and Mesa and various drivers and things.
We love getting your feedback. If you've got a comment about something you hear on the show, why don't you drop us an email on show@ubuntupodcast.org.
And now it's time for all your wonderful feedback. And first up, George emailed us to show@ubuntupodcast.org.
Some applications I'd like to see improved or revived on the Linux desktop. 1. A user-friendly GUI database front end. While LibreOffice Base and KDE's Kexi may be databases, they fail the user-friendly test. There's obviously much database power in Linux. Most seem server-based and very complex. 2. PDF tools. Ocular works to fill in forms created with Adobe Acrobat, but just misses the mark. 3. The Banshee music player seems to have fallen off the face of the planet in terms of continuing support, but it brought the best of iTunes without the worst. And 4. Secure remote desktop without the security issues that have afflicted the likes of TeamViewer or the sense there's spyware. Okay. Well, I've got some thoughts about this. Anyone else?
I do too. Yes. So for the friendly GUI database front end, I can understand this. If you ever used Microsoft Access back in the days or Fox Pro on Windows, then you would have been used to something that was vaguely user-friendly, that you could create a database and then create programs that use that database. I've recently been monkeying around with a SQLite database, and I've been using a GUI for it called DB Browser for SQLite. I can't remember where I got it from. It may well be in the archive, but I downloaded that, and you point it at your database, and then you can do stuff like throw CSV files at it to inject files into the database, and you can use standard SQL commands in order to interrogate the database. And it's got a nice point-and-click GUI interface, and you can modify the database and roll back the stuff you've done, and it's a really nice. If you're into something like Access, it's a bit like that, but just for SQLite. And because SQLite is a single file, then it's really easy to set up because it's a single file on your file system, and you don't need a database server.
And on the secure remote desktop side of things, take a look at X2Go. That's a great terminal server remote workstation solution that doesn't have any sense of spyware.
Dave Evans sent us an email.
I want to help more in the open source community by filing more bug reports. However, I feel that when I find possible bugs, I tend to feel that I must have done something wrong rather than there being a software problem. How do you tell the difference? Or should I file something anyway and let the developer let me know if it's expected? Well, this is actually, I think this is an interesting point, because I've heard people say this before, that like, I don't know if this is a bug or not, or whether it just always does this. And I think the best thing to do is to communicate with other users or the developers themselves. So that might mean jumping in an IRC channel, jumping in Telegram, asking other people who use the same piece of software, hey, when you press these buttons, does this thing happen? And you might find someone else says, no, it doesn't happen for me, it only happens for you. Or they might say, yeah, it's supposed to do that. Or no, that sounds like a bug, let's go and file a bug. And I think that's the best thing to do, is to speak to other people who might experience the same thing. And that's either in the applications channel, or the distro you're using may have a support channel, or the Ubuntu podcast Telegram channel, wherever it might be. You'll probably find someone else who can help you go through the steps of figuring out whether that's expected behavior or a bug.
Gregory John emailed us.
In Season 12, Episode 18, you asked the following question sourced from Alan Pope's telecast. What can we do to promote the idea that people create apps for Linux rather than distros? Well, maybe awardification. Distros are more celebrated and sometimes create job opportunities. Maybe this could be changed by creating an app award or media campaign.
This was actually something else I thought about while we were having this discussion with regards to mobile apps, because one of the things that mobile apps do is get you out there as someone who can develop mobile apps. And then if a company wants a mobile app developed, there's a chance that you'll then be able to get work through that. And I do know people who've gone that route. So if the same was true of Linux desktop apps, which unfortunately I don't think it generally is at the moment, that would encourage more people to do apps for Linux.
Yeah, if it was a thing that you would put on your CV and be proud of, you're saying. Yeah. Yeah, interesting point.
It doesn't. I don't think it would matter if you, wanted to make Linux applications in your spare time because it's what interested you. If you were making quality software and you have that in your GitLab or GitHub project profile, and you can direct, recruiters and prospective employers at that as an example of your work, then you get that benefit whilst contributing to, a community that you enjoy being a part of.
Christopher Patty emailed us.
Listening to the awesome Bash readline tricks you discussed in the last episode made me think about the person who maintains those amazing tools today, Chet Ramey. For anyone who enjoys the fruits of his hard work, he might appreciate a heartfelt thank you. He's been doing it forever and has made Unix a better place for it. You can find him on Twitter at Chet Ramey, and his homepage is a URL which I will put in the show notes. He says, your browser may scream security warnings at you. Ignore them. This page is just old school. Nothing dodgy there. Okay, I'm going to click the accept the risk and continue and go to his website, and it is a website from the past, Times New Roman, but that's fine.
Marcus Willock emailed us.
This wiki page seems to have most of the bash commands, and it's a page on Wikipedia about GNU readline, and we'll have a link in the show notes. So maybe that's the crib sheet that Stuart was asking after.
That's an absolute trove. We should print that out and put it on the wall.
DSAN left a comment on our website.
Any RSS for the telecast? No.
And finally, thanks to Valenier, Natalia and Charles for their offer to meet up for lunch, and we're very sorry that we couldn't make it. And that's all for episode 22. Thank you all for listening. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. Next week, we'll be discussing the community news, goings-on and events, and you can get in touch with us in all the usual ways. You can email show@ubuntupodcast.org. You can come chat with us at ubuntupodcast.org/telegram. You can tweet us at ubuntupodcast on Twitter. If you feel like buying a VPS, get it from bitfolk.com. They sponsor us.